Welcome back to the Live Kid Free podcast. I'm Rachel and I'm your host. Today I want to dive into the topic of the birth rate, specifically the allegedly declining or slowing of the U.S. birth rate. According to the CDC, the U.S. birth rate hit a record low in 2020 to a level that the Brookings Institution calls, quote, considerably below replacement levels for the foreseeable future. Sounds very ominous. This is the second slowest decade of population growth in American history. So, we're really kind of in uncharted waters here. And I just want to be clear, the U.S. population is not declining. And I hear that from a lot of people, and I just want to say, look at the data. The population is still growing, it's just growing at a slower rate. So population decline is really not the issue here, at least not for now. Sabrina Tavernise of the New York Times says, quote, "We are barreling toward a very fundamental change in American society, and it is going to take all of our collective effort to solve this problem." And the reasons for the slowing population growth that are mentioned include three main reasons. Number one is a slowdown in immigration. So despite the rhetoric around immigration and refugees in this country, immigration has actually been declining. According to Pew Research, the U.S. authorized immigrant population rose rapidly from 1990 to 2007 before declining sharply for 2 years and stabilizing at about 10.5 million people in 2017. Meanwhile, the number of unauthorized immigrants in the U.S. has continued to decline, falling 12% since 2010, according to the Center for Migration Studies. The second main reason for population slowdown that is cited is really economic uncertainty and distress. Economic recessions and economic distress historically has really corresponded to a reduction in births. After the Great Financial Crisis in 2008, birth rates have continued to decline from 2.1 children per woman to 1.7. And of course, COVID, the COVID impact is real. According to Pew Research, some estimate that there will be close to 300,000 fewer births in the U.S. in 2021 as a result of the pandemic. Overall, the U.S. birth rate dropped 4% in 2020. The number three reason that's cited is really just widespread preference change towards fewer children and changing ideas about lifestyle. And how I interpret this is women are taking more control over childbearing. Declining birth rates are seen across the board in all groups in the U.S. and also in other high-income countries as well. So this is not isolated to a certain specific group or demographic. I think it's really interesting that fertility rates are always measured in the number of children per woman because we are the gatekeepers to the continuation of the human species. What is the rate of children per man? Is anyone actually tracking this? Honestly, I don't think this is meaningfully and rigorously tracked because I could not find any data on it, which of course is super interesting, But anyway, so from what I can see in my research for this episode, male fertility is measured in sperm count, which by the way is also declining massively. Sperm counts in men have halved in the past 40 years and will decline further due to lifestyle, stress, obesity, and chemicals in the environment. And that is according to Professor Shanna Swan at the Mount Sinai School of Medicine. So until the medical community figures out a way to have babies in a lab, they still have to convince vagina owners to bear their children, which some men, I would argue, view as quite an unfortunate and annoying inconvenience. And really, therefore, a reason to come for us and our reproductive rights and force us to have kids that nobody actually wants. Of these three sort of macro reasons for the declining birth rate that I mentioned, so that's slowdown in immigration, economic uncertainty, and just preference changes and lifestyle changes, I'm most interested in the third. I'm obviously interested in this because it's relevant to my choice to live child-free and also just to the child-free community as a whole. But I'm also interested because it's squishier than the first two that can be more rigorously measured. And I think that this sort of third lifestyle-related macro trend is really where child-free voices can be heard in a meaningful way. Because while we may not have all the data, we sure have relevant and powerful ideas because we are reason number three. And we can and we really must add value to this conversation. I came up with 5 reasons that I wanted to share with you that I personally think are responsible for this change in sort of lifestyle preference. And these are ideas and observations, specifically my ideas and observations, because I like exploring ideas around the topic of living kid-free, which you probably do if you listen to my podcast. But again, my personal opinion here, if yours differs, if it aligns, either way, would love to hear from you. Just hit me up on Instagram. The number one reason I think these lifestyle shifts are happening towards fewer or no children is really because women have money. To quote the feminist philosopher Lil' Kim, first you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the motherfucking respect. Okay, maybe she's not technically a feminist philosopher, she's a rapper. But I would argue actually those things are pretty much one and the same. Anyway, so the U.S. economy is really driven by consumer spending. And we are the number one largest economy in the world. So one really needs to make money in order to spend it and consume things. And as women become more educated, employed, and really financially independent, we do statistically have fewer children or have them later in life, or we don't have them at all. And this is true in the US and also other developed countries. Girls' education has been described by the Brookings Institution as the most powerful and effective way to combat climate change for this exact reason. Because money is synonymous with empowerment, the less women have to rely on men financially, the more empowered we become. And what I'm seeing unfolding is a generation of women who are paid and therefore have realized that they actually don't need to find a partner or get married or have children to ensure their financial security. And that means women increasingly have babies because they want to, not because they have to. And this simple yet powerful fact creates a direct and serious conflict with the next reason I want to discuss, which is the fact that motherhood actually really kind of sucks. And I really talk about this extensively on the podcast, perhaps even exhaustively. But I often describe motherhood as 80-20% drudgery and joy. The data show that women shoulder a far greater portion of household labor and emotional labor when it comes to the traditional, quote, family life with a partner and children. Not to mention more women are working than ever before and increasingly controlling more of the household finances and purchasing decisions. And women have really long been socialized to really shoulder and own the quote unquote caretaking responsibilities, or what I like to call enduring the real suck of parenting. And men haven't been socialized to shoulder this at the same level because, historically they've been socialized to work outside the home while women manage the household and really owned that home domain. Let's talk a minute about single parent households. According to a Pew Research Center study of 130 countries and territories, the U.S. has the world's highest rate of children living in single parent households at 23%, which is more than 3 times the global average of 6.8%. My point here is, as the demands on women increase, both in and outside the home, while simultaneously women are becoming more financially independent, the value proposition of motherhood just simply isn't compelling. And what is a value proposition exactly? It's the why. It's a business term, it's a marketing term that in a very simple, straightforward way, summarizes why a customer would choose to buy your product or service, over somebody else's. For example, Uber, their value prop is always get the ride you want. Bitly, which is the link shortening service, their value prop is short links, big results. HelloFresh, their value prop is take the stress out of mealtime. When it comes to motherhood, a lot of moms say it's worth it. That's the value prop. To which I always respond, what is worth what exactly? The third reason I think people are shifting to a fewer children or child-free lifestyle in the US is because life is expensive. And I often think to myself, how the hell do people afford kids? Life is expensive, and it's getting more expensive seemingly every day. The Consumer Price Index, which measures the change in prices that we pay for basic goods and services, is up 7% year over year from 2020 to 2021. Like food, gas, clothing, everything is at least 7% more expensive. I think gas is like 50% more expensive or something insane. Housing costs in the US have skyrocketed everywhere since COVID. According to Zillow, the typical home price is up a record 13.2% over last year, and it's expected to grow up another 15% by May 2022. Austin, Texas is up 30%. Salt Lake City is up 20%, which means that also all goods and services related to the home have also gotten more expensive. Like good luck finding someone to renovate your kitchen. Oh, and childcare costs. Yeah, like the equivalent of a mortgage and going up. And not only is it getting more and more expensive, it's getting more and more difficult to find. Care.com says families spend 10% or more of their household income on childcare, with most spending over $10,000 a year. And in more expensive areas, families are spending like $2,000 to $3,000 a month. And unlike governments in many developed countries, the US government does not subsidize childcare. So yeah, life is expensive. It's really fucking expensive. And I actually think the grind of like working to afford to live is actually one of the things that inspires people to have kids. Like why am I working so hard? Like what's it all for? What will make me happy to like offset this miserable and soul-sucking grind that I have to participate in order to just like live my life? Oh yeah, I'll have a kid. If you're somebody who likes your job and you can like maintain your physical and mental health while doing that job, like, holy shit, you are privileged. So back to my original question on how people afford kids, it's really, really hard for most Americans. And the physical and mental toll from the daily grind that is required to afford kids is immeasurable. My fourth reason that I think people are shifting towards, fewer or no kids is because our worlds are bigger now. I'm an elder millennial, so I legitimately remember life without the internet, and especially life without social media. And as ubiquitous as these things have become, there was once a world in which screen time was non-existent because there really were no screens to spend time on other than the TV. So all we knew, all we were aware of at that time before the internet, before social media, was really our own environment. So at that time, before the internet, before social media, all we really knew and all we were really aware of was what's in our own environment and what we saw on TV or read in books, which was of course not searchable or browsable or Googleable. It was all push and no pull, and today is a totally different story. I'll use myself as an example here. I follow travel accounts on Instagram that serve me photos of exotic locations and breathtaking scenery from all over the world. I follow influencers and brands that inspire me to pursue growth and self-actualization and entrepreneurship. I read tons of content about new ideas and perspectives that challenge me to think differently. I listen to podcasts that give me information and perspective. I stream content on demand that is relevant to my interests. So when I say our worlds are bigger, what does this have to do with having or not having kids? So my theory is that, one reason that having kids has historically been the default lifestyle and aspiration is simply because people default to and perpetuate what they are familiar and comfortable with. And because they weren't really exposed to the idea or the possibility of an alternate choice or lifestyle. Similar to a formal education, the internet and social media are really showing people alternate lifestyles in real time and showing specifically women that their fertility is not the be-all and end-all of their existence. But unlike a formal education, the internet and social media are super targeted, and therefore they arguably create a more curated and personalized and accelerated education than a traditional one. Not to mention, it also provides fresh content and ads and products that enable us to actually pursue these ideas. So when I talk about our worlds being bigger, this is what I'm talking about. We are more aware, more exposed, we have more information than we ever have before in the history of humanity. And as a result of this, we just have more options, or we're aware that we have more options. And I think this alone is enough to make some people think like, do I really want kids, or is there just more or different things out there for me? My fifth and last reason for this sort of macro trend of having fewer or no children is the fact that we are just waking up. Woke culture means different things to different people, and I'm not going to pontificate about what woke means and who is woke and who is not woke. It's not my jam. But thanks to the internet and social media, it's a lot harder these days to keep secrets and hide bad behavior or wrongdoing. It's also a lot harder to hide societal strife. And as a result, the aperture is widening when it comes to making reproductive decisions. There are other factors that come into play that may have been present 20 years ago, but weren't openly discussed and put on blast on Twitter. Some of the factors that we're waking up to include climate change, resource shortages, economic uncertainty and collapse, institutional racism, white supremacy in mainstream culture, and even pedophilia in the Catholic Church, on a mass scale. When it comes to the American dream and the American way of life, the cat's really out of the bag. Our entire operating model as a nation in the US is built to promote consumption. It is not built to promote human health, happiness, and well-being. And it's kind of hard to have this idea of American family life when it feels as though we are waging war against these issues and against each other. So when child-free people say things like, I don't want to bring kids into a world like this, I think the feeling that they're actually articulating is really a hopelessness about the future, and a hopelessness that they perceive cannot be remedied or alleviated by bringing new life into this world. I know I just hit you guys with a lot of data points, but when you talk about things like declining birth rate, I just really feel like it's important to be data driven. So I'm actually going to publish a list of resources for this episode actually on my website, so you can see them if you want. But yeah, just to conclude, the slowdown in population growth in the US and also in other developed countries will continue to be a source of intense scrutiny and theory and debate and visceral emotions. And for good reason. The human species is facing a real existential moment. I won't call it a crisis, but it's definitely a moment. So get ready for a dramatic increase in pronatalist propaganda and messaging that will be catapulted from every which way. Perfect example is Pope Francis this past week saying that child-free people are selfish. And as a child-free person in this important human moment, just remember that your choice and your voice are really important right now. Child-free people at scale are turning the course of humanity. And with that will come criticism for sure, but hopefully also curiosity and acceptance. So let's own our choice together. Thanks so much for tuning into this episode. I appreciate your support. If you have not reviewed my podcast on iTunes yet, and you're an avid listener, I'd really appreciate if you would do that. It helps people discover the podcast and helps with rankings and all that good stuff.